All right. Well, I think we're going to dive in, and if something comes to mind, do share with us in the chat. I'm Lisa Fain. I am the CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence, and I want to welcome you today to our Thought Leader Conversation series for our first ever repeat guest, who we had on 2 years ago to talk about empathy. While still a respected leader in the field of empathy, we're talking today about strategic networks in mentoring. So without further ado, I want to introduce Patricia Bravo. She is somebody who doesn't follow convention. She selected career opportunities which have given her an unvarnished, hierarchy-free, direct line of sight into the everyday impact that leaders have had on their teams. She earned an MBA and worked her way up at companies that were acquired by Oracle and IBM. And after she did that, Starbucks, making an unusual choice. What did she do? She turned down a promotion to serve people she cares for most, her team members. And while she was navigating corporate life, she supported hundreds of students through a teaching side hustle. That defiance won her an Instructor of the Year award, landed her an invitation to publish research, and opened doors to teaching undergraduates at University of Washington, Bothell, and professionals at the UCLA. She bucked convention yet again and started her own company, Bravo for You, where she's become known for her human-centered, empathetic leadership programs with clients like Sony Pictures, T-Mobile, Amazon, and many, many more. I am super excited to welcome Patricia today. Hi, Patricia. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me. It's so exciting to be back.
We're thrilled to have you back. I want to dive right in because there's so much to talk about this topic of strategic networking. So let's just first ground ourselves a little bit. When you hear the term strategic network, what does it mean to you, and how is it different than just this term networking?
Yeah, when I think about strategic networking, and I love that you framed it kind of with that connection, it's about more than just a list of names or a list of people in your orbit. I really like to take it to a place where we're thinking about the strength and the health of the relationships with the people that you have in your networking. I often share this metaphor of thinking about networking related to gardening. Earlier this year, I had a whole bunch of stuff going on in my both professional and personal life, and I love to tend my little plot of garden that I have out front. And I didn't have a lot of time, so I did something that might make gardeners cringe. I got a little packet of seeds, I threw it out there, and I added some water, and I crossed my fingers, and I said, please let something happen by the time summer comes. Not surprisingly, there's a bunch of flowers in one area, there's weeds in another. It's not looking particularly great. And so I think what happens is that when I think about a strategic network, I think about it related to a garden. It takes some planning, some care. I noticed, is it Sarah? Sarah said something about intentionality. It takes some intentionality and some ongoing nurturing. And so I think we'll probably get to talking a little bit about how I do that, but I really try and look at a map of networks to help people identify where are the relationships, what's the status of the relationships with people in their network, and where do you need to make an investment to kind of keep that network or that garden thriving.
Yes, thank you. And I actually now do see Sarah and Mandy's comments. They were hidden from me before, but before we go further, I just want to acknowledge them because I think that they set the groundwork for exactly what you're talking about, Patricia. Sarah said, when I think about network, it's those people she's created relationships with, relationships that are unique and different and really intentional. And Mandy says network of connected individuals in some way. It's just this connection and this gardening. So let me just ask one more foundational question, if I can, Patricia, because what I think you are so well known for is this topic of empathy. And so, which is what we had you on to talk about 2 years ago. What's the connection between the empathy and then this topic of strategic networks?
Yeah, I'll give my quick definition of empathy because I really think that's helpful as kind of a foundation, which is I look at it as being having the ability to accurately identify cues and clues to activate understanding. So the shortcut is it's about understanding others, and activating that understanding happens through empathy. And when it comes to networking, I really find that empathy is actually what turns a network or an early connection into a real relationship. So I love that already this topic of connection is coming up here.
Mm,
It also helps you tune in to what other people need, which is I think one of the hallmarks of what starts to strengthen relationships, and you can help um, nurture and help them develop and flourish into uh, a group of people that are mutually supportive to each other. And so it also helps you identify, I mentioned kind of identifying the status or the state of your network. Does a relationship in your network maybe need attention? Does it need repair? Does it just need more nurturing? So it's almost like, if I go back to my garden metaphor, empathy is like a little bit of the sunlight and the water, because without having that, the connections will wither regardless of where they are.
yeah. Makes that metaphor so much more powerful. And then just to bring it into the personal, so what's your own story about how strategic networking and mentoring have shaped your own career path?
Yeah, I have so many stories. It's hard to pick one, but if I think of one that's maybe played out throughout the trajectory of my career, one that stands out is somebody that started out as an instructor in a certificate course that I was in. Her name is Donna, and Donna was my instructor, and I learned some great things in the certificate, but she was working in a role in a profession that I aspired to. So I stayed in contact with her, sometimes lightly, sometimes a little bit more heavily. I moved out of state and moved away, so sometimes our connection was not as strong, but I always had some sort of interaction with her. And what I realized is that over time, that consistent engagement um, turned her into a deeper connection. And so I think that what happened as a result is that when I found myself in a situation where I needed support, our strength of the relationship was strong enough that she was able to offer me what I call discretionary effort, or I don't call it discretionary effort, this term discretionary effort, which is about people being willing to go above and beyond what's expected. And I found
Mm,
myself, I don't know, maybe 10 years after I had met her in a role that I had very carefully selected because I was going to have a chance to do some leadership development that I was just learning about at that time. So I was really excited. The company had the budget ready. I was going to get to lead. And about 6 months into the role, the budget got pulled. So nothing else in this job was exciting to me except that part of the role. And I'd just been there 6 months. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And what I ended up doing is trying to think a little bit outside the box and figure out where could I continue to do some leadership development. And it occurred to me that that sometimes happens in teaching. And so I reached back out to Donna and I said, are there any teaching opportunities at this school? And it turned out that there were. And she, almost without me knowing, found the right people to talk to and introduced me to them. So it helped me find a landing pad for the work that I wanted to do that I couldn't do in a job, and then turned into kind of a side teaching career that I didn't expect to happen. And Donna and I are still in touch to this day. Recently, she volunteered to pilot one of my courses. So I think that she stands out because she's played a role throughout different parts of my career, but I think these stories are not uncommon for a lot of people that I talk to. And when we think about the strategic part of networking, I also often think about the long game. And so I think Donna represents maybe a little bit about a long, wonderful networking opportunity that I've been able to benefit from and contribute to.
what stands out for me for that story, Patricia, is the idea that strategic networking, I think it, people may think the term strategic means like that you are planning all of the things all of the time, but instead it's kind of about that consistency of showing up, of of, to use your metaphor, watering in the garden and then letting the unexpected grow, right? Maybe who knows what seed it was going to grow. Like the teaching opportunity wasn't something that you had necessarily anticipated, but because you were present and because you had nurtured the soil, whatever was there to grow was able to grow, and I love the idea of the strategy leading to something that might be unexpected as well as to something that's expected, right? Being able to leverage that opportunity.
And being really open to what those possibilities are without necessarily knowing what they could be. I think that sometimes is challenging, particularly in today's environment, right? No one has a lot of extra time. We're dealing with a lot of multiple priorities. People have lots of uncertainty and challenges that they're facing, particularly at this moment. I'm hearing that from a lot of people. And so you might question, is it worth the investment to invest in a relationship where I don't know what's going to happen? And yet, I think there's a lot of benefit that can be derived.
Yeah, I love that. What do you see as the key qualities or the elements that make a professional network truly strategic?
Yeah, so this is where I had to think about this for a while because I started getting questions from people who realized that I was benefiting from the combination of leveraging empathy to grow my network and advising others in doing that. And what I realized is that there's really kind of this map that all of us can create for ourselves to evaluate the types of relationships we have with people in our network and also determine if it's the right mix and strength, both in terms of quality and quantity for us. So I have a couple graphics. Can I share those up, which might be
Yeah,
helpful
please.
to have a look at them? So I'll share this first one here, which is actually about thinking about your network broadly. And so what does it look like to have kind of a strategic, thriving network? I think it's about having a blend of the quality and the quantity that you need for different aspects of the circumstances that are happening in your world. For example, if you're early in your career, maybe you're looking for people that can help you develop and grow your career. If you're a business owner, perhaps you need a different type of network. Often, as people grow in their career, they're looking for multiple types of network. So I think the first thing to think about is how do you develop a network where you have a series of people that are those who are trusted, engaged, and strong enough to create a platform where they might offer some discretionary effort like Donna did to me. And so I think that shows up when you have a sufficient number of connections, and there's no right number, and you have the quality of the relationships that you can tap into them, knowing that people will engage and partner and respond. And so I came up with this map, which is really about 5 different points in your network to think about. So I invite everybody who's listening to think about who are the people and name names for yourselves. Who are the people that fall into these categories? Because it's about identifying who's in this category and then evaluating the strength related to the network needs that you have in order to develop kind of that thriving network or grow it to the need that you need, or perhaps reactivate if it's become a little bit dormant. So the first point is really an early connection. Those are people that you've just met or perhaps recently reconnected with. So that might be somebody you just met at a conference, or maybe somebody that reached out on LinkedIn, or maybe it's a former colleague that you just ran into at a conference. That's an early type of connection. The familiar connections are a little bit better known. And with those, you might have some occasional interaction. Maybe it's somebody at work from another team that you worked with years ago, and you see them from time to time, or you run into people at industry events. Sometimes in teaching, I hear from students, oh yeah, I worked with that classmate in another class, but I haven't seen them since then. But I love that project that I worked with them on. So that might be like a familiar connection. The engaged ones are connections that are growing. So these are developing relationships, and these ones need some consistency to grow. So kind of this is the ones where you might be running into people with some regularity. Maybe it's a peer that you've partnered with on a few projects. Maybe it's somebody you don't work directly with, but somebody you admire at work, and so you have lunch regularly. Maybe it's an external person, a vendor who you value their expertise and you check with them for advice, or maybe they value your expertise and they're checking in with you for advice. And then the last two are often what we think about when we think about people in our network, which is who are the people that can really help us? And I think it's really important to think about all of these people in your network. So the allies here are the trusted collaborators. These are the people that you can rely on. You can text, you can ping them, they're going to respond. Maybe this is somebody who has stood up for you in a meeting when you weren't getting support. Maybe this is a mentor who checks in and guides you even when it's unprompted. And then the last one are champions. Champions are those sponsors. Those are people who are actively going to promote you, whether you're in the room or whether you're not. This might be somebody who recommends you for a promotion. Maybe it's a client who is referring you to other people without you knowing it. I always think about when I was in grad school, I had a professor who nominated me for an award. I had no idea she had seen something in me that was like worthy of that type of recognition. And so those are the types of people that might show up in those categories. So when I think about building a strategic network, I think it's really important to think about the mix of roles that you have in your network, which represents each of these categories.
So here's a question that just emerged for me as you were explaining that, Patricia. When you think about developing your network, are you moving contacts through each of these stages, or are you developing them within each of them?
Yeah, generally developing within each point. There may be some situations where you might look at your overall network map and say, oh, I actually don't have any champions. I don't have relationships that are strong enough that when I'm not in the room, they're advocating for me. In which case, you may want to think about, but there is somebody I'm engaged with who might become that person. So in that situation, you might want to move people through. There's other cases where you might think, you know what, I haven't touched my network in a while. I haven't reached out. I've been knee deep at work or on this project. I need to, refresh, reactivate, in which case I would encourage you to look at all of the different points. It also depends on really the circumstances that are going on in your world. I know a lot of people think about networking when it's time to look for a job. You've been through a layoff. I know a lot of people are experiencing that challenge right now and trying to reactivate their networks, or you're thinking about you're just maybe looking for something new and a different kind of role. And so that's when you activate your network. And I think part of what's important when it comes to strategic networking is thinking about this as something that's ongoing. Sure, it'll be up and down and there'll be peaks and valleys when you're, more or less engaged. But it's really about having people in each of those points in the network map so you can tap into them at different times when you need them, and it's generally readily available for you.
Yeah. So each of those 5 roles or whatever it's not a scale of quality.
Correct.
Scale of function. Yeah. I love that. So if I wanted to assess whether my current network is working for me, how would I go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I recommend that people map it. Like take these 5 and categorize them for you. Like literally write down people's names in your network that fall into, early or familiar, engaged, each category, and then just kind of step back and have a look at them. What is the quantity? Do you have a category that's completely empty? And for what your needs are right now, is that a problem or is that okay? So an easy situation is, somebody is looking to maybe develop in their career and they want more industry contacts outside of their current organization. So they might realize that they have, a lot of early connections, but they don't really have any that are in the familiar or engaged. And so in that situation, they might say, you know what, I want to see if I can shift a few folks and gather some more connection time and invest time with them to really understand what their needs are and strengthen that relationship. So I think one of the things to look at is quantity, right? Look at the actual numbers. The other is quality. So that's when you start looking inside the relationship. So now you have this map of all the names and you can see, yep, maybe this looks okay. Maybe here's some gaps I need to bridge. But then look at the strength of each relationship. So look at the individual names and identify, is my relationship with that person currently strong and healthy? Is it current? Are there some areas that maybe I've neglected? I realized that recently with somebody and I had to say, okay, I gotta like get back and re-engage with this person. Um, is there some imbalance? Sometimes that happens, these relationships sometimes get out of whack. Sometimes there's imbalance on our end or the other person's end. What do I need to do to really strengthen those relationships? So the idea is to align the map with your needs right now professionally, not to necessarily move everybody along or move everybody in the same place.
Is there a rule of thumb in terms of how many contacts and how often you should be nurturing them, or is that just a little bit, see what works? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there's no formula. I wish there was. It would make it a lot easier for all of us. So I think it's really about identifying what are your needs right now, where a network would be beneficial to you. And I think this is the important part, where can you be contributing to others? Because that's going to strengthen the network. So it's not necessarily about what we can get and also about we can give. I talk to a lot of students that say to me, Patricia, I'm a student, I'm obviously looking for a job. I don't think that I have much that I can contribute to, a seasoned professional. And I really like to spend a lot of time helping people earlier in their career or any stage in the career recognize that they have a lot to offer other people that sometimes they don't recognize would be valuable to somebody. So let's say you're trying to get an industry contact that has a lot of experience because you can learn from them. You also might be able to tell them, what are things like in your landscape? What are the insights that you're gleaning? None of us can be in depth and involved in everybody's, professional world or industry. But you can provide some insights, some highlights, some summaries to people. And so I think it's really important to think as much about what you might gain from a network, but think about just as equally, what can you give? What might you be able to offer? And you can figure out what you might be able to offer by empathizing, by understanding what somebody else's needs are. Then you'll get some insights to, oh, you know what, this person is really interested in attending conferences on the West Coast. I just attended a conferences on the West Coast. I might be able to give them a couple of data points as to what that looks like or, what I thought of them.
Yeah, I love that. It occurs to me, I've been spending a lot of time lately talking about this concept of developmental networks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of one concept.
Yeah.
Then there's this, you have a personal board of advisors that is certainly a form of a developmental network. And then there's this idea of strategic networks. Yeah. So in your view, how do those three fit together, or do they?
Yeah, I think I would take it back to kind of the synced network map. So if I think about, at least for me, a personal board of advisors is a much smaller group that's probably made up of the allies and champions. Those are people that I turn to for like deeper guidance. They really know me. I really want to get some candid feedback, like give it to me straight. Where am I missing? Where are my things? Where am I falling short? So that's what I think about kind of a personal board of advisors. But I also think, there are other groups that can also advise us that don't fall into that category. So if I think about where could I gain something from early or familiar connections, like for example, for my business, I have two advisory teams. One are rising leaders, which is a lot of the work that I do is benefiting and supporting rising leaders. So it's helpful for me to know what's going on in their world. But the other one is really early professionals. And it's really helpful for me to kind of get fresh and new thinking that's happening. Sometimes I get it in teaching, but I don't always get the candor that I might want in teaching because those students know that they're getting a grade from me. So there's a little bit of a differential, a power dynamic. So I think that's a different way to think about a network in a strategic way. That's not my personal board of advisors, but they are advising my business and offering recommendations and suggestions. The other one that you mentioned is the developmental network, which I love. That to me is more about peers. Is that usually how you're thinking about it?
Well, it's more, to me, a developmental network is more encompassing of that. That's meant, I mean, it would be each of those 5 categories, but also kind of topical, right? So you think about the different roles that you play in your life, and what are the relationships that feed that? Or, is there a peer who can teach me in this way, or somebody who's more senior, or somebody who's more junior, right? It's kind of developed a different constellations, right, of those relationships is what I think of a developmental network.
Sure. So more broad, it's overall learning and growth, but it might come through different directions and different types of skills. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think a strategic network, again, it kind of goes back to ensuring that those relationships are strong enough that people are going
yeah,
to voluntarily offer some of that discretionary effort to allow you to learn and grow in ways that you need to. And so I think I keep coming back to it's about the strength of those relationships.
yeah, yeah. I think I'm still mulling over your garden analogy, right? And it's what you got. You can't let the dirt go dry.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's left on. I can't keep a plant alive. But I imagine if I were a good gardener, I would know that you got to keep that soil ended as well. So
Yes.
um, so let's just shift this a little bit to the idea of mentoring. How do you see mentoring fit into the idea of a strategic network?
Mm. Um, I mean, I think mentoring can fit into any of the 5 points on the map. Um, as relationships develop, they just grow stronger and stronger. And yeah, I think I'm just going back to this notion of it's about tending the garden.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
matters isn't necessarily the nature of the mentor, but the fact that you're tending to the relationship so it's healthy and strong.
And so, what are ways one can tend to a relationship?
Mm. Um, I think it depends on what the status of the relationship is. So if it is, let's do an early one. So I'll give an example from yesterday. Somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn. It's somebody I don't know. I saw that we have a couple people in common. So I thought, okay, she knows a few people in my orbit. She does work that's similar to mine. I accepted her connection. And when somebody reaches out that I don't know, I often inquire, what prompted the interest in connecting. And I do that for 2 reasons. One is if they respond, it tells me a little bit about how I might be able to help them and what value we might gain from being in touch with each other. If they don't respond, it tells me that for whatever reason, they can't engage at that moment. Maybe they're not interested, or maybe they're just busy and they saw, oh, I'd like to connect with her, but they don't have time to engage at that particular moment. But I do take note when somebody engages back right away. And so this person engaged back right away, and she told me a little bit about her background, some things that she's excited about that she's working on today. And we went back and forth a few times. And a little bit later in the dialogue, she mentioned very briefly that she's looking for a role. So I took note of that also because she didn't lead with the fact that she was looking for a role. Along the way, she asked what I was interested in. She was curious about something that I'm focused on this summer, and I shared with her. I said, "Oh, I'm, interested in getting, opportunities to talk to new people, like I am with you here with your audience, and continuing to explore more speaking engagements." And I sent her some information about that, and she actually took a look at it and wrote back and responded to that. So there was actual engagement there. We were going back and forth, and so
Mhm.
she's an early connection for me. I have no idea where this might go. But I saw that she was interested in being engaged. And so I think you want to be attuned to your ability to be engaged and also be identifying those in your network and their engagement. And is there an opportunity for you to strengthen that going forward? Some of it, to be honest, is timing, right? If she hadn't written back at all, I probably wouldn't have invested the time to find out more about her. But if you see that somebody
Mhm.
is engaged or you have a dormant connection who perhaps you have been engaged with in the past, you might be able to reactivate that connection. So if you're thinking about the health of your relationship, part of the signals is just identifying the current state of engagement.
Yeah, I love that. You and I have a common connection who suggested to me in the past I should have a top 30. And it's interesting as I think about this, I hadn't thought about it just now, Patricia, but I think what I'm going to do after our call is look through the people I have identified kind of as top 30, right, who I am in contact with most frequently, and map them on your map of 5 different types of connections, and see kind of where I'm at. And I am somebody who likes to track things, or likes to think that I like to track things. I don't often track things as often as I like, but the idea of thinking about when is even the last time I was in contact with this person, adding some value rather than asking for something of value, I think could be really, really, really useful. I'm curious about your view of peer mentoring as a part of the developmental network. And I think you've touched on it a little bit, but, in full disclosure to this group, we are part of a peer mentoring group that you started and developed some structure around that I know has been incredibly instrumental in my own career success. I'm wondering if you can talk about that and the role of that and how this relates to strategic networks.
Yeah. So yes, selfishly, I'm a big proponent of peer mentoring. I think that when you can develop trusted relationships with peers, there's so much that can be gained developmentally. So I think that's part of my my deep interest in it. Like anything else, I always take it back to, ooh, how does this connect back to the map? So if I think about peer mentors, often those are folks that sit at the engaged or ally level. At least that's kind of been my observation. And I find peer mentors really critical because they often bring a blend of candid insight within a trusted environment. So I like to say that they keep you connected to what's really happening. So you get to know a lot more that's below the surface. So things that you might not hear being shared in public, somebody might be able or willing to share with you some additional insight if it's in a little bit more of a trusted, confidant environment. I think there's also a lot of mutual learning that happens in peer networks because often those peers are at the same level. They might have different backgrounds or industries, but you might be at a similar life stage or at a similar professional stage. And so I think that there's a lot of value to be gained in terms of mutual learning, experiences that you may share where it's easy to get some alignment and insight, and experiences that you haven't shared, but because you've had a series of experiences, you can find points to relate to accelerate what your learning is. And so then you get some efficiencies around that. So I do think sometimes peer networks, especially once they become a little bit more developed, you get a lot of efficiency from them and acceleration around the learning.
Love that. Curious your thoughts, and I just want to, for those who are not looking at the chat, but eating their lunch or otherwise just listening, if you do have questions, we would love to hear, or comments even about how this has come to play in your own life. Just share those with us either in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to hear them. And while you're thinking about that, I'm curious what advice you would have for leaders and for mentors on how to encourage strong strategic networks within their organizations and within their mentoring relationships.
Yeah, so inside organizations, I found there's a range of philosophies about encouraging networking. And so I'm often suggesting to leaders that they be really courageous to encourage networking. And so the reason I say that I've seen those philosophies on one end is absolutely we're going to encourage and support networking across the organization. In other organizations, kind of at the other end of the continuum, I see leaders that are like a little bit concerned about people networking because they might leave their roles or they might, find something else that they want to do. And in the spirit of development and growth, I think we have opportunities to help support people in learning and growing. And so, I tend to fall on the side of the continuum that's really around helping people develop their networks, both internally and externally. So inside an organization, I really think modeling is often the best way for leaders to do it, to be courageous, to not only model networking, but to maybe be transparent and share a little bit about some of their networks, both internally and externally. So people can see how they've done it. That doesn't mean that they need to do it in the same way, but it might give you some ideas of, oh, this person's really connected in their industry, or oh, this people has surrounded themselves with technical experts. You can get some ideas about what you might want to do for yourself. I think you also, if you're a leader within an organization, you want to help create some space for people to create new, early, and familial connections. And especially if you're in a larger organization, to be able to connect across organizations, cross-functionally. And then if you're a leader, really support those things. So reward those efforts that are taking place. Certainly, if some results come from it, those are often reward, but I think reward the efforts, because networking, those true healthy relationships take time. So I think this is one area where it's important to reward the efforts before you're actually seeing the results. And then, of course, when you do see the results, that's also a sign that you've developed a healthy network.
Yeah, I love that. I think that in my own view, there's organizational structure, and then there's individual agency and accountability, right? And so if organizations can be creating both the physical space and the temporal space to do this, and then also the structure, right? So what resources do you have for people who are in learning relationships with one another? What connection resources do you have for them, right? Power questions for them to be asking one another, ways for them to be learning, to say celebrating that. That's really important. And also encouraging the individual agency and accountability, so that they're not just relying on organizational structure, but they're recognizing that if we are going to be one community, if we are going to be one organization, it takes each individual to have ownership over that. So, I think there's huge role there.
I agree. The point that you're making about agency is really resonant here, because in the absence of structure, that's what we have to fall back on. Many of us will be lucky to have that structure. Many of us will be lucky to have somebody like you who advised a leader to develop that structure, but not everybody is in that situation. So I think considering both is really important, and recognizing that we do have agency even when it is not formally presented to us.
Yeah, yeah. I love the ripple effect of it, right? Like I love equipping people with this idea, equipping people with the resources and the space to create these relationships. And then it improves their leadership ability, it improves their engagement, like all of the other indicators that HR professionals are looking to see, to look at the health of an employee culture, get fed when you encourage strategic networking within an organization. It's really remarkable, I think. I want to know, Patricia, from you, who is in your inner circle right now, and what kinds of roles do they play for you?
I'm just thinking really quickly. I'm very proud to say I have people in all 5 categories in my inner circle. And so I say that because I've got folks that are earlier in their career, long-term champions like Donna, some allies, experienced leaders. And what I find is they each play a different role for me. Sometimes somebody plays a role for me in, lifting me up. I had a bunch of things that went sideways earlier this year. And I had a champion who came out of nowhere, who decided that we were going to have monthly calls. And that was really, really meaningful to me, because I was in a place where I needed it, but I couldn't necessarily think about setting it up or articulate what I wanted. On the flip side, people that are rising in their careers offer a lot of information around, what are you experiencing in today's climate that might be really different than the climate I experienced when I was rising in my career? And what are some of the needs, and how has the pace changed, and how's the tone changed? I mean, some subtle nuances that maybe you don't get from, watching videos or reading things. I really like to tune in to the individual experience. And so I think in my inner circle, I'm looking to gain, and I get individual experiences, but also synthesized through the lens of their own network. And so there's a little bit of a multiplier effect, particularly when it's, the folks in your inner circle are a little bit more trusted. So I like to think that I get some additional insight and wisdom because of the discretionary effort that they offer to me, because it's a trusted relationship. They might tell me things that I wouldn't find elsewhere, or certainly not as quickly. And so yeah, I think I like there's so much that I gain from business insights and recommendations, my own developments, sometimes what not to do. That one's not always as fun, but important. And so I think in that inner circle, it's really about identifying for yourself is, would you benefit from somebody in your inner circle that's in every single point? I do, and I have. And I think I've recognized when that has not been full, or I haven't been tending to it as much.
Beautiful. All right, we do have a few questions in the chat. One is an empathy question from Haley, and then actually a couple from Vernell on mentoring. Let's go with the empathy question from Haley first, and then Vernell, get to your questions as well. So Haley says, I've been struggling to figure out how to word a question around this. How can mentors balance empathy with accountability when guiding mentees through challenging feedback or performance issues? It's a great question, and you have the empathy expert. So Patricia.
Haley, I love this question, and I get it a lot. So you are not alone in wondering this. I think it's something that leaders wrestle with. And so I often like to point to one idea that sometimes is helpful. You can tell me if it is in your situation, which is empathy is about understanding, but understanding does not equal agreement. And so I think the empathy that you can gain from understanding, let's say somebody, you need to deliver difficult feedback, or there's a performance issue. Something's not going well, something's going sideways. And again, empathy is not a substitute for performance management. So I'm going to assume that this is, early conversations that you might need to have with somebody. What empathy gives you and what you gain from it is understanding where the other person is coming from. That doesn't mean that you need to agree with it. So I'll just use a really easy example of, let's say somebody's coming in late, and you really need them to be available for the customer or the client, and you need to give them that feedback. Maybe there's a reason why they're coming in late. That is something that is reasonable and that you can accommodate or work through. Maybe it isn't. Maybe there's not a good reason. Maybe it isn't acceptable. But what empathy gets you is it gets you more of that understanding, so you can package your response in a way that will be most effective for them to actually hear, and it'll lower the barriers for their receptivity. So if you see that somebody has a really significant reason why they're coming late, and you think it's reasonable and you think it's somebody you might be able to accommodate, you will enter that conversation, then the next part of the conversation, much differently than if they had a different reason, which is one that doesn't sound like it's acceptable, of, I oversleep every day, or whatever it might be. That's not acceptable in your particular situation, in which case you need to give them a different kind of feedback, which is, at our organization, those are things that we unfortunately can't accommodate, and so our expectations are, this. And so I think that empathy helps you with that balance in what you're going to communicate next. But always keep in mind, empathy is not about agreement. It's really about gaining understanding. Let me know if that's helpful, or at least the start.
It's a great reframe, Patricia. Just a really good way to look through, and Haley says it's very helpful, so thank you. Okay, Vernell asks, what are some of the more successful strategies you've learned to influence leaders in committing to a mentoring program? And can you also speak to the sustainability of mentoring programs and relationships? Yes, I'll give you a high level, Vernell, and I'm happy to answer in more depth offline if it's helpful to you. So the beautiful thing about mentoring initiatives is that you can influence leaders who lead with their head, and those who lead with their heart, and those who lead with their hands. There's amazing data, evidence on when you have a mentoring initiative, it improves, mentors are improving the quality of their leadership skills, they're improving their career satisfaction, they're just becoming more competent, and they get better business results. So you certainly can communicate through data, and we can help connect you with some of that data if that's helpful to you as well, but also testimonials and stories about people in the organization who have participated. You know, it's like I'll have what she's having. the old when Harry met Sally saying of like, you know, when people see it, those in the organization who have had successful mentoring relationships, whether part of a mentoring program or informally, it increases their likelihood of wanting to participate. So you can do that through short videos, you can do that through storytelling. And then there's always kind of the carrot and stick approach of, you know, evaluating. I love it when organizations do this, and of course it takes some time to do this, but I've seen really successful participation when a leader in an organization says, I am committing in each performance term to invest in my own learning and the learning of somebody else, and I'm going to hold accountable the people who report to me to doing that in some way as well. And they can choose whether it's through mentoring or through something else. But if you are making space for talking about and encouraging learning, that really does help influence that. And in terms of sustainability of mentoring programs and relationships, sadly, I don't have enough time to go through all of it, but I will tell you that measuring, tracking, talking about, promoting, and consistently communicating helps a lot with creating sustainable initiatives, as well as some of the tactics that we've already talked about. Haley says, I've seen mixed research on whether empathy and compassion can be learned. What are your thoughts on this? And what are your recommendations for embedding these concepts into leadership training?
Love it. Yes. So I'm definitely not the expert about compassion. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I don't know as much in terms of the research there. I do think empathy and compassion are two very different things. Empathy is about understanding, and compassion is a choice you can make as a result of understanding. But on the empathy side, there's no question for me, the neuroscience and all the research tells us that empathy can be learned, and I'm happy to share some of that research with you. If you're interested, I've got a really nice tool of some research that just came out in January this year that was like 42 research paper, a meta study that validated a lot of what we've known and seen about empathy for a long time, just kind of revalidating. So I'm happy to share that with you if you're interested. And your part two is how to embed these concepts into leadership training. That's probably a bigger conversation, but I think part of it is introducing a common language around what empathy is, because even in the research, we see a lot of different definitions. I shared mine with you, that it's about accurately identifying cues and clues to activate understanding. But I think that's the first point, is to really make sure you've got a common definition. Hopefully that's a start, but happy to connect if you're interested in knowing more.
Beautiful. So let me ask you one final question, which is my one thing question. If there were one thing that you think that people who are listening to this today could do to go strengthen their their strategic network, what would you advise?
Relationships need attention to stay strong. So look at all your relationships and identify what's one thing that you can do to contribute to a relationship that you really value today.
Beautiful. Thank you, Patricia. Another fantastic conversation. Join us. We're taking a break for the month of August, but join us in September, where we're going to talk to Pete Schramm about really continuing this idea of strategic networking, of developmental networks, on how to build a dream team. He has written a recent book on that, and we're really excited to have him join us on September 16th at 11 o'clock Pacific time. And in the meantime, wishing you all a wonderful rest of your summer if you're here in the Northern Hemisphere, a quick winter if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, and really the gift of developing your own strategic network for your own professional success. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us.